you guys. I am Jill Farmer, and I'm really grateful that you took some time out of your morning today to come join a conversation. I do want it to be a conversation around time and stress management for these, we called it troubling times, but also just very strange times for most of us. The normal is life and how we're used to being productive and being in the world and acting and doing has definitely shifted for just about everybody, even those of us who, being part of the RISE community in both Denver and St. Louis, are used to maybe driving the pace of our own productivity a little bit more than somebody who's in a traditional full-time office setting. It's still very different. Just for so many factors during this time. And so we're going to talk a little bit about ways to meaningfully be meaningfully productive and to take care of ourselves from a stress and anxiety perspective, and why that integrates into being meaningfully productive as well. So I just want to do a really quick check-in, and I'll go ahead and call on you guys because I know it's hard on Zoom when people start talking and we jump back and forth. So Darcy, would you mind, the question that I'm going to ask is if you can just do a quick introduction of yourself, a sentence introduction, and then in 1 or 2 words, give us your relationship to time right now.
Hi, I am Darcy Carney. I'm the Executive Director of the Building Owners and Managers Association here in St. Louis. So I have, my members are in the commercial office real estate space. They're under a lot of pressure right now with trying to manage buildings and people coming in and out of those buildings and all the touch points that they have in those spaces. My relationship to time right now, I used to think, you know, a couple weeks ago, I didn't have any time to get all of my work done. And now in a matter of moments, it seems my relationship to time is a lot looser. There doesn't, you know, they're all busy with their jobs, and the association work has, since it revolves around a lot of meetings and events, it's taken a little bit of a back seat, doing a lot of rescheduling. And so I feel like right now I have a lot of time, so.
Okay, it's definitely changed. Thank you.
Definitely.
Okay, Erin, how about you? 1 or 2 sentence introduction, and if you can give us a word or 2 to describe your relationship to time right now.
Hi, sure. My name's Erin Premie, and I'm the Executive Director for the Big Muddy Dance Company. I have always been sort of a juggler in that I'm just trying to find enough time and mental capacity to focus on so many different moving parts of our company. I also have an almost 2-year-old at home, so that takes up quite a bit of brain power as well. And so with all of this development and being at home now and working from home full-time and trying to keep a company alive while having a 2-year-old as well full-time, that I feel as though my time is even more pressed than usual. And I still feel just as much a juggler, except that the location of my work has made things more difficult. So I am just trying to navigate through that and figure out kind of what my new normal can look like and how I can keep my sanity through all of this.
Okay, understandable. And your tag says RISE Collaborative. So tell me who you are that has the RISE Collaborative tag from Denver, I'm guessing.
I think it's Lindsay that we're talking to.
That's me.
Thanks, Lindsay.
I'm Lindsay. I'm the Community Associate for the Denver campus of RISE Collaborative. And my relationship with time, I used to be very much a stickler on time, almost to a fault, to where I would almost get frustrated with other people who didn't respect my time or their time. But now I've really started letting a lot looser, especially now since we don't really know exactly the situation. So it's been kind of a back and forth with me and how I navigate time.
Okay, thank you. Amy, can you give us a 1 or 2 sentence introduction and a 1 or 2 word description of your current relationship with time? Oops, you're on, you need to unmute, Amy.
Good morning, everybody. Amy Hoganson. I'm an attorney. My specialty is in family law, and my relationship with time with this pandemic has reached a new level, and I keep thinking of you, Jill, which is why I was so grateful you were doing this, because Jill said something once that I will never forget. She said, I didn't really learn, or something about I didn't really learn time management until I was in my 40s. Or something related to your book, how well you could use time. And so that's always stuck with me. And now with this, having to work at home, having kids, what Erin had said too, it's really, really tough. And so I feel like as much as we should give ourselves a little bit of grace, we're not, and realizing we need to do things a little bit better. So I feel like I'm failing right now in the time management, and would love some thoughts from our resident expert at RISE, Ms. Jill Farmer.
Oh, thanks, Amy. Okay, and I'm going to guess, let's see, Keaton, am I saying that correctly? Okay.
Beautifully. Oh my
Okay,
God.
good.
It's so rare, so congratulate yourself. I'm Keaton Ingalls. I actually, as of yesterday, have just changed my job. I am going back to industry, but I work with senior executives to essentially define and execute on their operational strategies. So I do a lot of, I would say it's sort of a chief operations hat type thing for mainly working with what we call kind of secondary strategy. From a time perspective, this has been a very odd shift for me, moving from being, I had my own firm, my consulting firm, and I've decided to go back to industry for a number of different reasons. But so I'm sort of suddenly faced with having to think about time very differently, because I've had full control over my schedule, and now I'm going to have a little less control over it. I will still be working remotely, so working with virtual teams around the world, but my time is about to get very, very different, and how I think about it is going to be very different, and it's going to be a major shift. And so I think having this particular period with not being able to travel and not being able to see people face to face and get sort of integrated into these teams, how I spend my time and really thinking about using that is very different.
Okay. And then finally, Sarah, how about you?
Good morning, I'm Sarah. I'm the general manager and business partner out here in Denver at Rise Collaborative. And similarly to what everyone said, my word would be just ever changing. Every day is very different than what it used to be, and looks different than the day that came before it.
Beautiful. Thanks, you guys, for being willing to share. And what's so interesting, right, is all of us are in a space. Everybody said that their relationship with time right now is changing. And I like Sarah's term, ever changing, because actually it's going to change throughout the seasons of our life for a variety of reasons. We're just sort of getting a boot camp experience of having unplanned and not by our own choice, shifting of our relationship to time. And I do time and stress management coaching and training and speaking largely in major corporations and organizations, everybody from Harvard Medical School to Edward Jones, Nestle Purina, all kinds of different places where I have done either short-term or long-term training and development around how to get more meaningful work done in less time with less stress. And so the bad news is none of us would have written the script for this or ever would have chosen this pandemic for the health and trauma and terrible experiences. The good news is that there is an opportunity for us to learn how to do some things a little bit differently that may serve us in a variety of different ways in our life. And so that's what we're going to talk about a little bit today. And I loved Darcy and Erin kind of set the paradigm for us. Some of us are finding ourselves with what I keep saying. I've been doing a lot of podcasts and writing. People have been interviewing me for different podcasts over the last week. Those of us that are used to that more highly pressurized, highly structured, highly scheduled day, even with the cues throughout our day of this meeting is at this time, this expectation is here, are finding ourselves sort of like with the banks of the river gone. It's sort of like we're in this mud puddle of, wait, what's next? Other people like Erin, because of just the situation of what's happening at home, still trying to have all those same work responsibilities, but then doing it without the flexibility of how to create workflow. Both of those can be stressful situations, just for very different reasons, but they still can institute this feeling of, how am I going to get something done or get something meaningful done? I'm going to share my screen with you guys a little bit just to break it up visually, because I know we learn a little bit better sometimes when we have and some different ways to learn and to think together. So I'd love for you guys, if you can, if it's easy for you to do it, and you don't have to if you don't want to, but over in the chat section of the conversation, on a scale of 1 to 5, which with 5 being like so stressed out, I can hardly stand it, and 1 being, I'm actually feeling really chill, super calm. Just self-report on that scale of 1 to 5 where you see your stress level at this point. And again, there's no right or wrong. Some people, I talked to somebody the other day who had a huge kind of work project due that went away. And so they said, I feel guilty, but I'm noticing that my stress level has changed. And in this group, most everybody's feeling in that 3 to 5 range, which is pretty typical for most of the people that I've talked to, which means we're at sort of an elevated stress level. So we're going to talk a little bit about, when I talk about time management, it's interesting, right? Because even though a lot of our circumstances have changed around time, the thing that's always true is we can't really manage time, right? The 24 hours in the day are fixed. What we can manage is our focus, our prioritization, what we choose to turn our attention and action toward, and making something meaningful happen, right? Which is kind of that definition of productivity, is producing something. We think of, well, a lot of times we confuse busy with productive, but busy simply by its own definition just means occupied. Productivity means producing something. It's iterative. It's doing something that matters to us. And that can be time with family. That can be memories. That can be a writing project. That can be a new strategic plan or Thrive model. There's no limit to what you're creating, what you're producing mattered. But so we can't really manage time. We can manage our focus. We can manage our degrees of our productivity, and that's very difficult to do when we are under stress or feeling pressurized. The consequences, of course, of being in that activated or stressed state are, we can list them all day long, but by now all of you know that it's very bad for your physical health to have stress hormones coursing through your veins at all times, associated with almost every major physical threat to the humankind, like cancer and heart disease and all hypertensive disorders. Everything you can think of, stress generally does not help. It also has the consequences of, it impacts our focus. It impacts our motivation. It makes it harder to get motivated and to stay motivated. A lot of times being in that activated stress state means we have trouble sleeping. And unfortunately, a lot of people think that in order to be producing or doing stuff, that we need to be have stress to be a catalyst or an activator. And then the problem with that is when we think we're already holding on to a higher degree of stress activation, and then we add world pandemic on top of it, and we realize, oh, actually, stress is not helping. It shouldn't be the catalyst for action. And right now, what it's doing is making my productivity screech to a screaming halt at this point. So you're like, great, I'm all stressed out. You've asked me to name how stressed I am, and then you've talked about how bad it is for me. Super helpful, Jill. What are we going to do about that? We're going to go back to the basics quickly and talk about the most effective biological, neurological way that you can process your stress. It feels like we're just stuck. It feels like the circumstances are imposing this on us and there's nothing we can do. But the good news is when we take some intentionality to prioritize processing our stress, we complete that stress cycle. We move through the stress to the point where then we have all of our capabilities to do meaningful, intentional productivity, right? Which is back to producing something that matters to you. That's my definition of success. That's my definition of productivity. Producing or creating, achieving something that matters to you. So the other thing that's important to know is that when we're in an activated state of stress, research shows us, done in the last few years at Harvard University, we lose 13 cognitive points of our intellect, right? We get 13 points, IQ points stupider when we are in an activated state of stress. So when we are requiring, because our circumstances have changed so drastically, we're requiring our brain to think out of the box, to create and produce differently, because either, as Darcy explained, the banks of the river have kind of gone away and we need to create new ideas for workflow and what we want to produce. Or in Erin's case, we need to find brand new times and ways to be able to produce meaningfully because of adorable little distractors who are there to walk with us in this journey. So processing stress, what is the most effective way to do it? And I have culled this down to three what I describe as tiny or ridiculously easy steps that we know work really well, again, biochemically as well as other ways. Oopsie. Exercise. I know it's boring, but we know that when we metabolize, that when we exercise, even for bursts of 5 to 7 minutes, we are metabolizing stress hormones in ways that are almost impossible to do any other way. So download a 7-minute workout as an app on your phone, take a brisk walk outside, you load up a YouTube video and dance. Anything that you can do daily, and particularly if you are feeling you are in an activated stress state and you exert yourself and think about what it is that's stressing you out, we know that you are helping to, at that point, metabolize those stress hormones. So it's not just about whether you fit in your jeans, or there's all these memes about, oh, what's going to happen to my body over this time. I could care less about that, but I do know that if you can do some exertion, physical exertion, you're going to really help your body's and brain's ability to meaningfully process stress. Mindfulness and meditation. This is a great time if you've been meaning to for the last decade or so, get around to learning how to do mindfulness and meditation. And it doesn't have to be really hard. Even 2 to 5 minutes a day, we know from the research, can have a difference in your brain's ability to sort of slow that reaction pause and to allow you to respond rather than to react in that sort of painfully sometimes negative way that causes us later on to go, oh my gosh, why did I do that? So again, all kinds of great resources out there. You can, if you want to spend some money, there's a great app called Headspace. There's one called Calm that has some free options for you. 10% Happier, Dan Harris's book, and corresponding app are very good. And good old-fashioned YouTube has all kinds of free guided meditations for 5 minutes. If you use Peloton, they have very good meditation apps that a lot of people forget to use as well. And Sounds True, the publishing company based out of Boulder, has some really good, even free 5-minute learn to help with mindfulness and meditation. We know that this helps with depression, anxiety, very helpful in stress processing. And then of course, community, but don't you touch hands like that now, right? we don't get to have that, the mental health and the processing of stress that comes together when we can join in physical space with each other. Unless you are with somebody in physical space already and you're within the rules of being there, cuddling with your kids is helpful for your endorphins and your stress right now. And if you can't do that, phone calls, FaceTime with friends, doing just what we're gathering here, where we kind of check in with each other, we see each other, we learn from each other, is very helpful in that processing your stress, as well as managing your thoughts. We know that when we get under stress or pressurized, we tend to go back to those old broken records of core unhelpful thoughts that play in our heads. Mine that I love to go back to is, there's not enough time. I'm running out of time. And by thinking the thought, there's not enough time, I trigger, because there's a lack, implicit lack in that sentence. I trigger an automatic reaction, an action cycle where I get stressed out, I get short with people, I'm uncollaborative, I lose those, I trigger that fight or flight response, so I lose those 13 IQ points because I'm in an activated stress cycle. And it makes me believe the thought there's not enough time in this sort of time-sucking vortex. You might have thoughts like, I'm doing this wrong, I have it harder than other people, I'm not smart enough to figure this out. There's all kinds of core beliefs that are patently unhelpful. That's, in cognitive behavioral therapy, a lot of times they talk about looking at what those unhelpful core beliefs are. But for you to notice and say, oh yeah, oh, there I am again. I'm back to that place where there's those core beliefs that are not particularly helpful to me now. And when you're thinking thoughts like there's not enough time, or there's too much time, or I'm not good at this, anything that is not guiding you toward meaningful connection and rich relationship to the world you're in, we know that it's really helpful just to notice it. I notice I'm having there's not enough time thought again. If I had you hooked up to functional MRI technology, instead of just having the amygdala, or the part of your brain that processes danger and alert signals, lighting up, your whole neocortex would light up. The part that is good at being creative, the part that can calm itself down and say, it's okay if I'm not doing as much as I've always done. I'm going to create a pathway toward a new normal here. And then sometimes we can even get to the point where we can replace the thought with something that's much more likely to serve us. Okay, so before we get back to the next thing, talking about some basic tools for stress management, right? Because a lot of people want to go straight to just give me the blueprint on time management and I just want to get going. But if our mindset is in that activated stress space more than ever, when I wrote my book 6 years ago, we were thinking a lot more in terms of just, we just need to change our thinking and that helps. Now we know more than ever that being in the activated stress state creates a mindset that it's not very fertile ground for us to grow or produce something of meaning, or to be able to meaningfully handle change or new expectations in changing landscapes. Okay, I'm going to shut up for a couple of minutes, and feel free to raise your hand or just unmute yourself, pop in with questions, comments, I don't think so's, around the stress management side of this. Anything? Okay. And as I'm moving forward, if you come up with an idea, or I left some time at the end that we can workshop a little bit, do a little bit of coaching around even specific situations that may be popping up for you when you're like, okay, well, that's all great in the aggregate, or that's all in that nebulous big world, but here is an exception. I would love to workshop or coach that around you as well. So again, one more try. Anybody else have anything that I've said that's confusing or doesn't feel doable. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about time management. And one terrible thing about Zoom is I'm forced to look at myself at how many times I do touch my face. I promise I'll go wash my hands when I'm done with this. While I'm talking to you and I'm like scratching my nose, so my apologies. We all, in theory, can do it so well, but when we're forced to have video proof, it's not so good. Okay, so one of the things that is absolutely integral during these strange and scary and tumultuous and wonderful, if you want to look at it that way, time that we're in, is that a lot of times we have these patterns, habits, traditions, the way that we set our schedules and work our days drives this sort of intrinsic motivation and schedule for us to get some things done. So that we know once the kids, for instance, get off to school, that's when we start working and doing this. Well, of course, if you're home and you have kids that are school age, they're not off to school. And so we have a big change in that process. Again, meetings, events, other things that sort of drive our schedule. And so as I mentioned earlier to Darcy, the banks of the riverbank are not there anymore. And so we have to think a little bit differently and be willing to engage in some different advanced planning than a lot of us are used to. A lot of us have been able to just use the preset structures of our kids' schedules, our work schedules, deadlines, expectations, superiors, direct goals, and use that as the structure for which we determine our actions and productivity. And in a lot of cases that is gone or has drastically changed. And so if we're somebody who tends to wing it and not do a lot of advanced planning, we're getting the opportunity to start playing in that space again. And so what do I mean by advanced planning? It's just kind of it's like, okay, well, that's an organizational psychology tool, and yeah, planning is good and doing it in advance is good, but what does that really mean? This is a very simple, granular, basic advanced planning routine that I recommend both for my top executive coaching clients at Fortune 500 companies, entrepreneurs, surgeons, other people that I coach around time and stress management issues. And it's just really simple. It involves, first of all, grabbing a good old-fashioned piece of paper. And I really suggest doing this once a week. If you haven't done it, today is a great day to do it. Looking ahead toward next week, you could also do it on Sunday or even first thing Monday morning. But you grab a piece of paper and you do a good old-fashioned brain dump, right? What does that mean? It means that you look at your calendar and you use your memory to know things that come up, and you write out everything out of your head onto a piece of paper that would be meaningful and is necessary for you to complete, that lines up with your values as a human being and citizen of the world in the next 5 to 7 days. You're like, well, I already have that going around in my head. Well, we know that short-term memory, and particularly short-term memory in times where there's altered situations in life and perhaps stress activation, is not so good at prioritizing, because as soon as new stimulation comes on, as soon as you watch something on the news that scares you or freaks you out, it's going to be hard to maintain a priority-based order of what needs to get done. So we use the brain dump as the tool in order to get the stuff out of our head from banging around, to use a term from the 12-step philosophy. It's the stuff that we're shoulding all over ourselves about, SHOULD, in our head. I should be doing this, I should be doing that, I should be doing that. We get it out of our brain space and onto a piece of paper where we can begin to process it into something actionable, which is a fancy way of saying get it out of our head and into the place where we can do something and do something meaningful and do something productive again, which is to produce or create, not just be busy, because our brain is busy and we're doing stuff, but we don't really know what it is that we're creating out of that. Now, the brain dump, some of you are like, oh, good, yay. I already do that, Jill. I already have my giant to-do list that I use every single week. The brain dump list is not meant to be this thing that you vomit up with everything that you should be doing as to be a worthwhile human being, and then you use that as your acting, as the thing from which you act or manage your tasks from. The brain dump is not your task manager, because it is not prioritized and it is not broken down into actionable days. And when we just try to take action off that massive list or that brain dump list, in my experience, every day, at the end of every day, we just look at it and we have black and white proof that we are indeed inadequate and never going to get every damn thing done ever, ever, ever. And so we don't want to use the brain dump list as a working list. It's simply a really effective way. I've talked about it way longer than it'll take you to actually do it. It's really a 2 to 5 minute process. And then we process the list, which is a fancy way of saying we take the tasks and ideas off the list and we put them into actionable places, or put them into places where we can execute action and get something done, right? So we don't just have it, the piece of paper, good, it's there. We put it someplace where we can actually do something with it. The calendar is the most powerful place for us to do something. We know if something's on the calendar, we're more likely to do it than if we just have it on a big list. So like working out, if you know, if you're like me, these days of sort of hibernating, it's been hard to get myself super interested in getting up and working out. But when I put it on my calendar, like I did this morning, from 7 to 7:30, and I know that my future self, which is another technique that works really well for me, will feel really good knowing that I have processed and metabolized some of those stress hormones. I put it on my calendar first. So here's just like I just grabbed a screenshot of a typical day of mine before I had life had changed so drastically back when I was out doing training programs in companies for people. But when we look at our calendars, I'm not interested whether I don't care whether you use a paper calendar, whether you use Outlook, whether you use iCalendar. I am interested that you take those items and tasks from your brain dump list and put them in time blocks on your calendar in priority order. Right. So what we tend to do a lot of times during this, when we get into this mode, is we have the big list and then we think, okay, I'll get going on that stuff. But without time blocking in priority order, which would be important, even important over prioritizing the important over the urgent, right? A quote I like from Stephen Pressfield, who wrote The War of Art, among other things, is the most successful people in the world are those who understand the difference between important and urgent and dare to prioritize the important over the urgent. Now, if urgent is related to healthcare, obviously take care of any urgent physical health needs, but a lot of the time we take emails or texts that are coming in and we label them urgent in our brain, even though they really aren't. And by deferring them off, even 45 minutes or an hour, or even 30 minutes from doing something in a time block fashion at the beginning of our day that matters to us, we're still able to get to it later, but we have made meaningful progress or accomplished or achieved something that matters in a way that's going to help drive and motivate us much more effectively than if we kind of just jump around. The other thing that I like, the reason I really like time blocking and time blocking in priority order, is it helps us have an honest assessment of what the amount of time that it takes to do stuff, so that we can be more authentic and honest with ourselves about how much time things really take. Sometimes we default to, there's this thing called the planning fallacy in organizational psychology, right? And it says that a lot of times people will tend to be optimistic or underestimate the amount of time a project will take, and then it creates stress and lowers quality at the end of the project. In my experience, a lot of times people avoid or procrastinate because they're overestimating because of perfectionism. Perfectionism and procrastination are often connected. And so when somebody is a procrastinator, they think they need this huge block of time to do something right, which means perfect, which is not really ever going to happen. And so time blocking and saying, you know what, I have a 45-minute window when my kid is taking a nap. I'm saying that with aspirational optimism, Erin, specifically on your behalf. Then I'm going to use that 45-minute window to do something that matters and that's of importance, and time block within that that time frame. We know from the productivity research, Daniel Pink wrote a great book last year on kind of helping us understand when we operate at our best. And most of us work best in 20 to no longer than 90-minute segments. So if you're somebody who has this kind of open white space on your calendar right now, just sitting down and saying, well, now I've got 6 hours to work on this project is probably not going to be particularly effective, because for most of us, it's around 50 minutes. We start to have diminishing returns. The glycogen in our brain is wearing out. We're kind of losing our fuel at that point. So task switching, which simply means getting up, moving around, doing something differently, is going to help to refuel your ability to stay focused and to create and produce something meaningfully. And that can be, you can leave it for 20 minutes, 40 minutes, 50 minutes. I like to do 30 to 45 minutes, because then I can also turn off all my alerts and stay in a dedicated, focused manner on the task that I have time blocked for that situation. Because we know, based on all the brain research on flow, that when we are in a state of flow and we're not stopping and interrupting and getting disrupted, we get a lot more done in less time. If we're kind of right along on something and then we're checking our texts and then we're just hopping over here to check to see what's happening in the news and we're on Facebook, it's a little like flying and then landing the plane. Every time we check the email, every time we do one of those things, and that is going to take a lot more time, energy. It's going to wear us down, and it's going to make us less effective in the long run. So time blocking in right-sized segments, in priority order, and then showing a commitment to unfocused productivity within those meaningful time blocked segments. There's this thing, I always tell the story of the low hanging fruit issue or the dropped fruit issue. If we don't time block, if we don't prioritize that stuff that matters to us, right? It doesn't have to matter to everybody else, but we know we're going to burn out less. We're going to have more intrinsic or internal motivation towards something when it matters to us and when we remember why it matters to us. And so when we kind of just have the big long list, and we just sit down with no plan, no advanced planning, no time blocking, what happens is we tend to, by nature, just jump in and handle the low hanging fruit. Well, the problem with that is, let's all pretend we were the world's most prolific and amazing apple farmers. And we have this incredible apple orchard, and it is peak season for us to harvest those apples. And every single one of them is at perfect peak ripeness right now. And the good news is if some of the apples have dropped on the ground and rotted, we can get about 10 cents on the dollar, or 10% of the total value of our apples if we just go clean up what's on the ground. So we go to harvest for the first day, which is hard work, climbing up in the tree and getting the ripe apples. We notice, there's quite a few of those rotten apples on the ground. So I'm just going to first go ahead and pick up all those ripe apples, those rotten apples on the ground. I only get 10 cents on the dollar, but I'm going to go ahead and do that first. So I do that, and then before I know it, it's the end of the day. Tomorrow I'll get to those perfect ripe apples that are up in the tree that are in that important category. And I come back the next day and there's a whole bunch more rotten apples on the ground. So I'm getting 10 cents on the dollar, and I've missed out on those up there. But if I'm not careful, right, I'm not just taking the low hanging fruit, I'm just taking the dropped fruit that really isn't particularly valuable to me there. So time blocking is a way that we can internally and in meaningfully and in a powerfully motivating way connect to the stuff that's more valuable to us. Okay, so in addition to time blocking, I like to also use daily to-do lists. Now, I don't care if you just have a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday notepad. So when I'm processing that brain dump that we talked about earlier, I can have a daily to-do list or checklist. This I set up in the reminders section of my iPhone. So those of you guys that are iPhone users, a lot of people haven't used it this way, but it's a really easy setup. Is in your reminder section of your iPhone, you set up a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday daily to-do list. And then I can actually use Siri even to populate the list from my brain dump. So I put the big stuff, the stuff that really matters in time blocks on my calendar, but I don't want to block my calendar more than 60% of the day full because, you know, life is happening and I've got interruptions and I've got things to do. So for that other 60% of the day that I still want to get some meaningful things done, I have daily to-do lists that, and when I process my brain dump list, I can say, oh yeah, that to-do list stuff needs to get done Monday. That stuff can get done Tuesday. That stuff can get done Wednesday. So my massive brain dump list now has daily actionable places to go, even beyond time blocks in my calendar. Because if I time blocked each one of these, my calendar would be full and I would feel really exhausted. And if I get to the end of the day and I haven't been able to get to all 5 of those, it's super easy for me to cut and paste into the next day's to-do list. So it's also Outlook has a really good daily to-do list option that can integrate well with Gmail, and you can even take emails or actions from emails and put them into your daily to-do list in a way that works really, really well. And so the last thing I want to talk about in terms of that time and productivity management side of things is what happens when we have, okay, I've had many people reach out to me and say, okay, I actually have the time now, or it's time for me in this period or season of life right now to tackle this big, hairy, audacious, honking thing that feels really overwhelming to me right now. And I feel so much like I need to be doing it, but that pressure of the world and all that stuff means I'm just frozen or I'm paralyzed or I keep dancing around it. And so it's important for us to recognize that a lot of times something that feels big or overwhelming to us is processed in that reactionary part of our brain where it's perceived as a threat, right? So we run from it, right? Flee, we freeze, we procrastinate, we're paralyzed, or we fight it and we get mad and we complain and we blame and we do all those kinds of things. And that's just our neurobiological reaction to being a little bit afraid or threatened by something that feels overwhelming. So a way to deal with stuff that feels overwhelming that is going to be more effective for us is to use a system that I have. I use the process that sorry guys. I use the terminology that my mentor, Martha Beck, taught me around this, which is turtle step, which is just simply a word for ridiculously easy steps. And I'm gonna take us back there. But turtle steps, also tiny steps or micro steps, because when something feels big or overwhelming to us, if we break it down into ridiculously easy steps, we stop having that procrastination, fear, blame reaction, and we're more likely to take steps. So I just did this with my daughter last night. She's doing online learning. She was on an international study abroad program that was canceled. She came home last week, and but she still has some pretty big projects due. Her professors are on the other side of the world, literally, and so she was trying to map out how to, over the next 2 weeks, make this to go from this overwhelming thing in her head to something actionable. And so we actually did one of these tiny step or micro step flow charts together to help her have a process that then she could transfer these tiny steps onto her daily calendar or to-do lists so that action got taken. So this is from a CEO of a large healthcare system who I had been working with, who was moving offices and feeling incredibly paralyzed and overwhelmed in this process. So we sat down together and in 5 minutes mapped out a series of ridiculously easy steps or micro steps so that because she was getting down to the deadline of needing to get her office moved and some important things. And she just was feeling very paralyzed because there was the process felt daunting to her. So I asked her what the first ridiculously easy step that she could take in getting this process done. And she said it was to call the maintenance support team to get a date on the calendar for them to come do the move. Okay, so she did that. And then the next thing that she said she needed to do was to sort all of the stuff in her office. When I asked her if that felt ridiculously easy, she said, no, it feels terrible because there's so much stuff and records, and some of it is confidential and some of it's not, and some of it I've been needing to get rid of for a long time, and some of it needs to go to storage. So she decided that to set up a series of 15-minute time blocks where she started sorting felt really good to her. So easy that she almost couldn't not do it. So in the process, we mapped out this sorting 15 minutes, and then she needed to make another phone call to arrange the technical transfer of her computers in the system and handle all of that stuff. And then to move, and then to box it all for 10 minutes. Well, the interesting thing is once she sorted and had made the call both to maintenance and to tech, she realized that they did all the packing, they boxed it up for her, they transported it. So she went from this thing that she'd been supposed to be doing for 6 weeks. We had a 5-minute conversation where we mapped it out. She spent about 45 minutes sorting the stuff, getting rid of 2/3 of the items in her office that were just weighing her down and making her office a very unwelcome and unpleasant place. Somebody came in, moved her computer, and boxed all the stuff up and moved it within a few hours. And so she was moved within 3 or 4 days when we had this conversation. So I like to walk through the example just because it shows you how the big, hairy, audacious thing sometimes that we're putting off, if we sit down, often it's helpful to sit down and do this with somebody else and say, oh, this thing feels so big. Would you help me map this out into a flow chart of ridiculously easy steps? And then you take those ridiculously easy steps and plug them into our very simple and basic advanced planning tools of the calendar time blocks and our daily to-do list. And then that big, hairy, audacious thing actually feels like something that we could take meaningful action on. The other advantage of using this flow chart system is, for instance, I used to hate as an entrepreneur doing my taxes every year because it just felt so daunting. And when I created a beautifully detailed flow chart of the ridiculously breaking down everything I needed to do in that tax process in ridiculously easy steps, then every year I just pull it out of the file folder now. And so I already have my roadmap or blueprint. This is also extremely effective if you are somebody that has people working for you or with you, because you can do this in a team setting, in a call like this, or on your, in a conference room back when we get to the point where we actually get to meet with each other in person again. And then you can delegate in ridiculously easy micro steps. What a lot of us will tend to do sometimes is when we feel overwhelmed, is like, can somebody please help me with this? I'm so overwhelmed. Am I the only one that's doing anything around here? And how much more likely are we to have collaboration and support when we can say, hey, I have 3 ridiculously easy steps I would like to delegate to you to help me out in this project. Would you be able to do that? Much more likely to get buy-in and to have specific action that supports the bigger picture. Plus, we're not, through emotional contagion, triggering the other person in an attack when we're just saying, could you please help me out with this, with no specific direction. Okay, so we talked about the simplest, most meaningful, granular ways to process stress, even in these strange times. And we talked about my favorite time management, simple, basic system for planning and taking action. Now, I want to hear from you guys about what makes sense in that, what doesn't make sense, where you might have ideas that you would be able to put this into play and feel inspired to take action, where you think you have something that might be an exception to this and not work, and you want to have me help you workshop through that. What comes up for you guys as you hear this?
So Jill, Keaton here. I love this. I think it's, you know, in and of itself, it feels very manageable. The question I have is, just from your experience, for creating these micro-step processes, do people, are people actually really capable of doing this on their own, or is this much better to be facilitated with somebody?
Well, it kind of depends. Sometimes I have people sit down and do it with me in a group setting so they can kind of see the way to do it. And sometimes people are like, I don't like flowcharts. I want to do it in a list. I'm like, great, I don't care. Or some people like to do it on a with Post-it notes on a wall, and because then they can move the flow around to different places on the wall, and then you take a picture of the Post-it notes on the wall, and then you send it out to the team, or you, if you know, if you're in a physical space meeting, you literally peel up the Post-it notes and hand it to everybody, and they walk out, and then you have the picture afterwards. So it works really well. I facilitate it with friends and clients all the time on the phone. And I mean, by facilitate, I walk them through it in 5 minutes. And so I do think it is something, when it's explained, if you can explain it by workshopping something that feels big and overwhelming with them, to say what's like, and sometimes that's cleaning out the basement or a closet or whatever. It doesn't have to be the big work thing. They begin to see how the process might work. And a lot of times what people will tell me is they realize they were thinking of something as one project when it really was a series of multiple flowcharts, that when you break it down into multiple flowcharts, it just really helps that sense of flow, motivation. It makes it feel doable, and the challenge feels more meaningful. So does that answer your question, Keaton?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. What else?
Jill,
Erin.
I love so many aspects of this, and I especially with kind of the breaking down of steps, I use a lot already in delegation and things like that at work. I love the priority order of the time blocks. I think that's probably where I'm missing a step. I think the important over urgent is where I'm struggling right in this moment right now. Like, as you're talking and I'm trying so hard to listen because this is really important to me and I want to use it. He is crumbling up graham crackers and throwing them all over my computer keyboard, which I also need to do important things. So
Yeah.
there's like this constant important versus urgent situation in my life right now where I'm like, I guess it's my brain power more than my time, because regardless of where I'm spending my time, there's going to be this urgent situation right now. And so I'm like trying so hard to focus my attention and energy where it needs to be while still addressing the things that are like urgent and like
Right. So that's a great, that's such a good example. So important, he's the most important thing, right? Works great, but really he is the most important thing. And so then that helps sometimes to restructure, particularly highly driven, highly successful people. It's really uncomfortable to think about how we honestly address the bandwidth of what's available, what our available brain space, time, and energy is in particularly trying circumstances. And so I would start with that he's most important, thinking about the other stuff as being important, but not in the same priority level exactly. How do we get creative to put some containers of time in so that you have some dedicated work or creative space energy to produce, address communication, delegate, whatever that looks like. And then there may be ways that, you know, you can connect with somebody who's been alone and in isolation for 2 weeks and hasn't been out, that would be able to do some childcare. I mean, there's ways to think about creatively expanding some of those blocks of time, but now is not the time to be perfect and do all things for all people. It's just not going to happen, and that's uncomfortable, particularly for high achieving people. So being able to sort of sit with that, and from a place of kindness and love and appreciation for all that we are doing, to use that as the filter to help determine what gets done and what really matters, is an important process. I've had to do it too, because my first reaction is, well, I've got more time and now I'm going to do everything for all people and parent, and you know, and it just can't be done. We have to be kinder to ourselves, I think. Anybody else in our last couple of minutes?
There's a question in the chat, Jill, from Amy.
Oh, thanks, Amy.
I don't know
Sorry.
if you saw that one.
What happens when we schedule too much, and how can we avoid overscheduling? This is a learning process, and so be kind to ourselves. Like, it's an experiment, right? So, oh, good to know. I've overscheduled. I have put too many things that I'm not able to maintain this pace in an effective way. So then we reschedule, deschedule things that we can. And again, recognize that in this new normal space, a lot of times our first reaction, particularly if we're a little stressed out and wound up, is to do more, because that's going to make us feel better, because we feel like we're achieving more, and our busyness and our worth can sometimes get intertwined in a not so healthy way, right? Busy is not our worthometer. And so I think just being kind to yourself and recognizing that as you're learning how to schedule your workflow in this space, that for next week, back it up, reschedule, deschedule, slow it down a little bit. That would be my advice on that. Okay, you guys, we are wrapped up with our time together. You can reach me just by going to jill@jillfarmer.com. Send emails, send a voice message, questions, comments, requests for resources. I'm happy to help you and be of service in any way I can, because we're all in this together in this strange and interesting time. And it was a lot to schedule being able to be here physically with us together, and I know that. So thank you guys for being willing to show up fully. Sarah, any rise notes anybody needs